What is up, guys? This is Simon from Frozen Card Gaming, and this is going to be another tips and tricks slash things to remember video for the branded deck. These are important to know, both if you play the branded deck to play it properly, and if you play against a branded deck to make sure you're not losing games you're not supposed to due to some interactions being done incorrectly. So I found out I really enjoyed these types of videos. I was going to make a video commentary of the mirror match from a match I played a couple weeks ago, but I decided to scrap that one because it was I wasn't enjoying making it, and it was also a bit outdated. There's been some really cool development in the TCG of this deck over the last couple weeks. I'm recording this right after YCS Guadalajara just ended, so we had Pure Despia win 2 YCSs back-to-back. Adventure Despia also taking a pretty sizable portion of both top cuts. And I think it both shows that, I think Adventure Despia is still the stronger variant because you have a lot of these top players still bringing Adventure Despia. But the fact that Pure won 2 events in a row is also an indicator that, you don't have to buy Adventure cards to do well. So I think that'll be interesting to see going forward what happens at YCS Hartford. We will maybe get a ban list before then because now we have the 2 YCSs over, and so it'll be also cool to see what the ban list does. We might see Adventure hits. We might see like Scythe Dagda get hit. Cyber's Eldritch just got second at the YCS, and that's very much a Scythe Dagda deck. Kind of taking advantage of the fact that people have been dropping hand traps lately. So we'll be on the lookout for that. But for now, let's jump right into the tips and tricks. Number 1 is about how to fusion summon and how this is important when you face cards like Cherries and Rivalry of Warlords. So when you resolve an effect that fusion summons, you do things in this order exactly. You first pick a fusion monster you're summoning, then you move the fusion materials, and then you summon that specific monster. So you can't change your mind midway through the fusion summon. So in this example, I'm going to activate Brand Fusion, and I'm going to dump whatever, and I'm going to summon Lubellion. I'm going to try the Lubellion effect here, and my opponent is going to Cherries on Mirrorjade. So I'm going to banish all copies of my Mirrorjade in my extra deck, which is 2 in this case. And now I have to resolve the Lubellion effect legally somehow. And so let's say I choose to shuffle back 2 Mirrorjade to summon like maybe Draco's Despia, for example. I can't suddenly change my mind to summon a Mirrorjade from my extra deck after I've put them back. The moment that I commit to a fusion monster to summon and start moving materials, I am permanently committed to that specific monster. So even though the Mirrorjade are now back in the extra, I can't summon the same one I just put back. So I have to stick to whatever I was originally going to summon, which in this case is Draco's Despia. So let's rewind a bit. The same thing will apply in situations like Lubellion versus Rivalry of Warlords, which is a very, very popular floodgate right now. So let's say I go Lubellion effect and they chain Rivalry. I have to summon a Dragon Fusion, so I have to legally resolve this as much as I can. One example is Albion, which takes Albaz and a light monster. So let's say I put back Lubellion and the Albaz in grave. Midway through this summon, I can't suddenly change my mind to Mirrorjade. Because, even though those are valid materials from Mirrorjade, I was locked in from Albion the minute that I started moving those materials. So I have to summon this Albion. And that's that. Make sure you're resolving these cards correctly. Make sure your opponent is also resolving these cards correctly. That's going to be it for this tip. This next one is going to be a very common situation in the mirror. It's about trigger effects and these complicated chains that tend to happen in the mirror and how non-targeting removal will interact with them. So let's say I have my standard setup and my opponent is going to activate Polymerization. They're going to fuse 3 cards into Guardian Chimera, and they're going to activate Chimera's effect. Now this doesn't target. So if I don't chain Brad and Red here, I'm going to lose it to this most likely. So I'm going to chain it here. And I'm going to do my standard play into my own Chimera. And then Red resolves successfully, and then their Chimera resolves. And because this doesn't target, now they pick what to destroy, and they destroy my own Chimera. So in the new chain, I can activate Tragedy and Adlib just fine, but Chimera was removed from the field before it could activate its effect. And under the new 2020 revisions, you can't activate the effects of the trigger effects of monsters if they're not in the same location that their effect activates. So here, Chimera never gets the chance to use this trigger effect, and I just can't use it at all. So it's really important in the mirror to know how these chains work out and kind of when you need to activate Branded Red to avoid things like this happening, because this is extremely, extremely common. But yeah, let's move on to the next tip. Next up is another Branded Red example, this one involving Triple Tactics Talent, which is a card that has been getting a bit more popular lately, so it's important to know this one for sure. Let's say that my opponent is going to Branded Fusion, I'm going to Ash them, and then they're going to Talents to take, and I'm going to chain Branded Red because I want to be able to get my Chimera play off, otherwise I'm going to have no monsters on the field. And I do my standard add back, I fuse 3 into Chimera, and Red will resolve, and then Talents will resolve, and they will take my Chimera. So now the question is, who gets to activate Chimera in this situation? Because there's 3 possibilities. I get to activate it because I was the one that summoned Chimera. my opponent gets to activate it because they're the one that controls Chimera now, or 3, neither player gets to activate Chimera at all. And the answer to this one is just ask your head judge. There is no definitive answer for this in a TCG. They have been ruling this different ways depending on the event. I think recently some people have been ruling that the player who summoned this gets to activate it. There is an OCG database ruling on Cyber Angel Natasha versus Sword Soul Changing, which says that the new controller of the card gets to activate it, but a TCG event doesn't have to rule based on the OCG database, and so it's really, really important you ask your head judge how this is being ruled if you think the situation will apply to you. So just know this beforehand. There's really no definitive answer on this, and you should not accept any definitive answer on this, except the one that the head judge gives you. Here's another talents tip. Mirrorjade has this clause on it, like a Highlander clause, where you can only control one Mirrorjade, the Iceblade Dragon. And so what happens here is I'm going to try to talents take my opponent's Mirrorjade. This is actually legal. You can mind control as well, and any cards that shift control, you can do this. But because you can only control one Mirrorjade, the one that you take control of is instantly destroyed by game mechanics. So this will instantly go to graveyard. And that's basically all there is for this tip. Note that also they can't trigger Mirrorjade Regeki effect off of this because you took control of it and then it got destroyed, so it was not in its owner's control. And that's just a minor one, but just be aware that you can talents to take your opponent's Mirrorjade if you already have one. It just instantly gets destroyed. Now I just want to talk about Branded Lost for a bit. This is a card that has been really picking up a lot of attention in the TCG, and I think it's important to know how this works. I'm not going to go over this card much in this video because I think there's been so many other places that have done it. So I'm going to link to Tombox's video in the description. He does a pretty good job covering a couple aspects of Branded Lost and what its text actually means. I'm also going to link to a Reddit post from Gallantron in the description where he has a lot of detailed examples of how cards like Branded Lost and Magical Meltdown work exactly and what that text means. So just know what this card does and when it lets you use your effects without your opponent being able to respond to them. And vice versa, if you're playing against Lost, you need to know when exactly you can and can't use stuff. One really crucial example that I am going to cover, just because it's that important, is the case where, let's say that my opponent activates Cosmic Cyclone on my Branded Red, and I chain my Branded Red as CL2. So I'm going to resolve Branded Red, blah blah blah, summon my guys. Now, Branded Red is going to resolve, and then Cosmic Cyclone is going to resolve. So when this chain finishes resolving, what happens is that it is not when a monster is fusion summoned this way, because what happened was the monster is fusion summoned, and then Cosmic resolve. So the last thing to happen is not the fusion summon of a monster. And so Lost Protection does not apply here, because this is not when a monster is fusion summoned. So in this example, since Branded Red was not Chain Link 1, my opponent can activate whatever they want in response to all of my effects on this chain. So that is, I think, a very crucial thing to know about Lost, and so that's why I wanted to specifically mention it here. Next up, I'm going to rapid fire 3 really quick ones. Number 1 is that Chimera does not trigger off of Verte Anaconda. This is a very rare example, but you can send Polymerization off of this, and then fuse 3 cards into Guardian Chimera. Unfortunately, Chimera has a text that it has to be summoned by a spell card or effect, and if you copy Poly with Verte, it's not a spell card or effect, it's a monster effect. So you cannot trigger Chimera in this situation. So that's a minor one, but important to know. Next up, if you play Hex Shield for Dragoon, which has been a thing in like Branded Outlet, for example, to protect your floodgates, this is a really rare example, but this does come up occasionally, where you use Hex Shield's effect on field to treat it as Albaz and Fusion Summon. Except this is not a Fusion Summon, this is actually a special summon. So this is an issue because if you try to bring out Lubellion with this, Lubellion only triggers if it is Fusion Summoned, and you cannot trigger this if it's summoned off Hex Shield because it was not Fusion Summoned. Last up is that if you play the main deck Albion, which has been a bit popular lately, this card is treated as Albaz while in the field or the graveyard, but not in the hand. So this card is not Albaz in the hand. In this example, I'm going to try to go Lubellion plus Albion in hand into a Mirrorjade, and this is not legal. You cannot do this. I would have to go into something like Trigger's Tapalia, for example. And this also goes without saying, but you can't Branded Fusion send an Albion from deck trying to treat it as Albaz. It would have to be the Dark Monster in this situation. You couldn't just say, I'm going to send Albion as Albaz. So only treat it as Albaz in the field or in the graveyard. Don't forget that one. To end the video, I'm going to go over 3 increasingly complex examples about player priority during the end phase, which I think is really important to know if you plan on playing this deck or really any deck, and just understanding how the fast effect timing chart works. So I'm going to go over that first. So this is the fast effect timing chart. This is basically your holy grail if you're a judge. And if you want to deepen your understanding of rulings in this game, this chart is really, I think, really paramount to understand. I'm not going to go over the whole chart, obviously, because it's just a lot of words. But for end phase priority, what's important are a couple things. So first off, the first time you enter a phase, the turn player always has the first opportunity to take an action, whether that's a spell speed 1 action or a fast effect or whatever. So in this situation, going back to the replay here, I have Aliber and a Mirrorjade, and I'm going to use Mirrorjade's effect to dump, I'm going to put Crow in my opponent's hand, and I'm going to use Mirrorjade's effect to dump an Albion to banish my own Aliber. This is pretty standard in this deck. And let's say I try to end the main phase, and my opponent allows me to end the main phase because they want to play around talents, for example. So in the end phase, because we just entered the phase, I'm turn player, so I have the first opportunity to take an action. So I get to activate my Albion search effect before my opponent can do anything. So Crow will never stop me in this situation. So if my opponent wanted to stop Albion here, they would have to Crow before I end my main phase, and that's pretty trivial to do. So that's the first example. For the second one, let's see what happens if I decide to Mirrorjade in the end phase instead. And let's go back to the chart for just a second. After a chain resolves in box D here, we notice that there's a couple boxes we go through. We first check if there's anything that triggers, which in this case there won't be. And then both players have the chance to use a fast effect, which is in this case any monster quick effect, or a quick play spell, or a trap card, or whatnot. And both players get the chance to use these fast effects before we go back to this open game state where I can activate my effects. So it should also be noted that effects like Albion are trigger effects, but because they activate in the end phase, they kind of behave more like ignition effects. I have to be in this open game state to use them. And that's going to come in very handy later on, I'm going to show off. So in this case, let's go back to the replay. I'm going to go to end phase, I'm going to Mirrorjade, and I dump Albion here. And now, my opponent has a couple options. The first option is because this is a cost, it gets sent immediately, and they can just chain Crow to the effect of Mirrorjade to banish the Albion. That's very trivial. But even if they waited until after the Mirrorjade had resolved, banishing the Aliber, after the chain is finished resolving, remember that both players can use the fast effect, so they can Crow the Albion before I get a chance to activate my Albion search. So this is the first example. Let's go to a more complicated one now. This next one is going to be an example of an Ironman that Nesh and his team played on Dueling Book a couple days ago, and both DB Grinder and Pack's channel have covered this Ironman in pretty high detail, so I really recommend checking those out if you wanted to see more commentary about this. I want to focus on the specific moment in the first match where Nesh gets Nibiru'd, and he uses his knowledge of how end-phase trigger effects work to really expertly play this game state. So end-phase trigger effects are kind of like ignition effects in how they work. You don't have to trigger them at the first opportunity. You can just choose to activate them in an open game state in the end phase. And of course, there can be plenty of other chains that happen in between those. So you'll notice that Nesh in his graveyard has Albion and Titanic Lad, which are both these end phase specific trigger effects, and he has a Fairy Tale Snow. So he has freedom to choose what order he's going to activate these in. He's going to activate his Albion first to set Brandon red, and this gives him another free fodder for his Fairy Tale Snow. You'll see he's going to banish his Mercurial here, the token, and also the Albion from the grave for fodder for the Snow. And having this extra fodder is nice because his graveyard is pretty light at this point, and then the Mercurial is going to get him another search. After this, he's going to be able to activate his Titanic Latin Grave because we go back to this open game state and he can do kind of whatever he wants. And he's going to use Titanic Lad here to summon Albaz, and he's going to use Albaz to discard the new fodder he just got from the Mercurial. So Titanic Lad summoning Albaz, and then pitching the Albion for fodder, and then summoning the Fusion Albion, and then going into another Mirrorjade here. So this is an example of really kind of what you can do if you know how your cards work and you know your game mechanics. It's a really cool example of just like general rulings knowledge and knowledge of game mechanics translating to like an actual benefit in game. So really important to know how these effects work. Yeah, let's go to the last example. This last one's going to be a pretty crazy mirror match that I saw a while ago, and it's going to show a couple of these principles, as well as how a card like Mirrorjade will interact with this. So going back to the chart for a second, to use these effects that trigger specifically in the end phase, you have to be in this open game state, and if you're not the turn player, your opponent has to pass from this open game state. So they're not like fast effects, they're not like trigger effects precisely. So that's the first thing that's important to know. The second is that Mirrorjade's end phase Raigeki is mandatory. The activation of the effect when it's destroyed is optional, but if you choose to activate it, you do eventually have to destroy something in the end phase. And that also applies to a card like DPE, where if you, for example, resolve it, you do have to summon something in the standby phase if you're able to. So we're going to see a couple of those principles here in this match, which is a pretty crazy one. It's gone on a couple turns. We have Blue, whose Tub is cute here. It's his turn, and he's playing against DS1. And Blue is going to go to battle phase and attack over Albert with Mirrorjade, and then he's going to use Mirrorjade effect, dumping Albion to kill the opponent's Mirrorjade, which is also going to trigger. They're going to dump their own Albions, and then they're both going to get removed. We're going to see them both trigger their Raigeki effects, which is pretty standard, and then we're going to see an Albert come back. They're going to crash, and then Red is going to take 1800 damage. Now Blue is going to move to end phase, and this is where the cool stuff happens. So Blue is going to navigate this in a very interesting way. He's going to use his own Albion first, and Red is going to try to resolve the Raigeki effect first, but Blue does have full priority to do whatever he wants in the beginning. In order to resolve this Raigeki, you have to be passing from an open game state. We're going to see Blue do a bunch of quick effects and his own spell speed 1 effects before we get back to player Red's turn to do anything, because Blue is turn player. So there's going to be a judge call here. I'm going to fast forward through this, but what's going to happen is that the judge call is going to agree that in an open game state again you can blah blah blah, and you have to be passing from an open game state for A to use his effect. So Blue is going to set Branded Red with his own Albion, and he's going to activate Branded Red in his hand to fuse for a Despian Caritis. Now Despian Caritis is pretty cool because this has a float effect. So now he can force the opponent to resolve Mirrorjade first. Or rather, now the opponent has to resolve Mirrorjade before leaving the end phase. And that's what's going to happen here. He's going to resolve his own Albion to get Branded Fusion, and he's going to resolve Mirrorjade because he must, and this is going to destroy Caritis. And then Caritis is going to trigger and get him Adlib. And so this is going to fortify his Adlib plus Branded Red setup, and it was just a cool way to kind of navigate this end phase game state. And you're going to see him in draw phase, going to resolve this Adlib, putting a Masquerade on board to do a lot of burn damage, and then sting his own Mirrorjade, and eventually Blue will win this game 1. So that's that for this example. I thought it was a really cool showcase of just how you can use game mechanics to give yourself an edge in these situations. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. This was definitely more of a complicated one than the last tips and tricks video. If you missed that one, I will link to it in the description. I'll also link to the YouTube videos I talked about in this description, as well as a great Reddit article from Galantron that breaks down really almost all of the interesting ruling questions you could have about this deck. But that's going to do it for me. For the future, I don't think I'll make much more Despia content. I do want to focus on agents possibly for a video, but I really want to wait for a ban list first, so I wouldn't expect anything for a couple days or weeks. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if this helped you in the comments, and until then, I will see you next time. Peace.